Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, where we are looking at modular solutions to housing. And our speakers today are Emily Christie of Ilke Homes, Mark Southgate at MOBIE, and Jez Sweetland of Bristol Housing Festival. So before we get into things, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Jadine Havel, and I'm a Senior Planner in Turley's Bristol office. And I also sit on the RTPI Regional Activities Committee for the South West. Before we get started, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Charlotte de Bourne, who's our RTPI Southwest coordinator, who's been organising all of this behind the scenes and handing over to us today to lead this seminar for you. A few housekeeping points for us all. You should have been coming in as muted from the delegates. If you have any questions for us or for the organisers and the speakers, then please send your questions in via the question box that should appear on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel or at the top. You can send those in at any point during the session. And the speakers' presentations are going to run for approximately 45 minutes. So we'll have 15 minutes per speaker, and then we'll come to the Q&A session at the end. So you can send those through at any point through the presentations, and we'll collate those and ask those. If there's any questions that we don't get to, we will take those away with us and come back to you via email to make sure we've responded to everything. So that should all be covered off. Copies of the presentations should come up in the handout box, which you should be able to see. That will appear, and you can download the PDFs of the presentations from today as well and take those away with you. If you have any issues with connection, please do try and reconnect via the link that you've been sent on the GoToWebinar. If there's any issues for us or any of the speakers, then just bear with us and we'll do our best to get the webinar back up and running. Do keep an eye on your emails, because it might be that we do have to resend a link to you via email to come back into the webinar. So I will introduce you to our speakers. We have a brilliant lineup today. So first of all, we have Emily from Ilke Homes. She's head of planning, and she joined Ilke in 2019. She's got over 10 years experience in various planning roles in both the private and the public sector, having previously worked at Crest Nicholson and East Staffordshire Borough Council. Ilke are pioneering the future of homes through sustainable and affordable modular development. Following Emily, we then have Mark, who's Chief Executive at MOBIE, Ministry of Building, Innovation and Education. He's a Chartered Town Planner with over 35 years experience in various roles in planning, environment and management in local government, non-governmental organisations and central government as well. He's also got a number of different roles around the General Assembly for the RTPI and also the Board of Directors for Offsite Alliance. MOBIE exists to educate, inspire and engage young people in the process of home design, building, manufacturing and clean engineering. And they're hoping to inspire the next generation to reshape the process of home building. And then we have Jez, who's project director at Bristol Housing Festival. So Jez is actually a qualified lawyer, and he did start his career in corporate law before moving into management, and he's had previous roles as CEO of a barrister's chamber and also CEO of the charitable National Skills Training Organisation. He founded the Bristol Housing Festival in 2018, and this was a response to the housing crisis that we've been facing. He has a passion to see innovation enabled to help create systemic solutions, and he believes that collaboration is key for us to have a lasting social development. So that's our three speakers for today. Brilliant lineup. I'm very excited about what they've got to tell us about modular solutions to housing. So before we get started and move on to the presentations, we've actually got a poll for all the delegates to look at. So hopefully a poll should come up on your screen in a second. And this is: what percentage of RTPI members surveyed in 2019 said they wanted more of a say in housing design? So we'll give you sort of 30 seconds to pick an answer. So have a go at this poll, and then we'll reveal the answer before we move on to the presentations. There we go. So we've got 47%, 57%, 67%, 77% and 87%. So most people think that we're at 43% of you on 77%. So the answer is actually 87% of people wanted to have more of a say in housing design. So it's an interesting one for us to start on, really. So what I will do now is pass over to our three speakers who will run through their presentations, and then we will come to a Q&A session. So I'll pass over to Emily. Thanks very much, Emily.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So what I'd like to speak to you about today is just having a look at what is MMC, what kind of technologies are used in MMC, and what that means for the delivery of housing. So just a little bit about Ilke Homes, which is where I work. Ilke Homes have been in operation for around 4 years, and they're the country's largest and foremost volumetric house builder. It's the only one to currently benefit from NHBC accreditation. We build all our houses in a factory located just outside of Harrogate. And what I'd like to do is try and aim to give you an overview of the processes later in the presentation. I'd like to talk to you this afternoon about modern methods of construction, looking at the general 7 identified tiers, and cover some of the benefits from delivering the scheme through MMC. Hoping that works. Oh, sorry, tech issues. So it's long been recognised and reported that we have a housing crisis in the UK. Figures suggest that by 2022 there'll be a shortfall of around 1 million homes in this country. It's estimated we need to deliver around 300,000 new homes per year by the mid-2020s. Figures released in 2019 suggest that we're only achieving in the region of 170,000. This, together with the rising house prices and supply-led inflation, are resulting in the lack of affordable homes. These are factors that have been identified that are contributing to the lack of homes being delivered. These include shortage in skilled labour, either as a result of our ageing workforce or the knock-on effect that Brexit has had on the construction industry, with less workers coming from overseas. We've seen materials and brick shortages in the industry, and I think the key question is how we deliver the number of homes we need whilst maintaining and even improving the quality of dwellings being delivered, whilst significantly increasing volume. So could MMC help in maintaining quality and help to speed up the delivery of the much needed housing stock? So what is MMC? Modern methods of construction have been broadly defined into 7 categories. Category 1 being the production of 3D structural systems. This is a systemised approach based on volumetric construction involving the production of 3-dimensional units in controlled factory conditions prior to their final installation. This is actually the category that Ilke Homes sit in. We produce modules which form complete floors of dwellings. The modules are made using a steam-framed system and are fully finished both internally and externally within a factory setting. They're plumbed, they're wired, they're plastered, the kitchens, the bathrooms are fitted, they're tiled, the external finishes are applied, and the roofs are completed. These modules are then delivered on site on a lorry, craned into position, where they're bolted to the foundations or the preceding floor. The stitching process of connecting each module on site, finalising any elevational joints and testing takes a matter of days, after which the home can be fully occupied. So a very pioneering form of MMC there. Going on to category 2, and I think this is the most recognised form of MMC in the UK. The 2D approach uses flat panels used for the floor, the wall, and roof structures they're made from varying materials. Again, these panels are made in a factory, but they're assembled on site to produce the final 3D structure. I think this tier of MMC is the one people automatically think of when we talk about MMC in this country. Going on to category 3, this involves the pre-manufacturing of structural elements for build. So this could include mass-engineered timbers, precast concrete, cold or hot rolled steels. This category can also include the production of pre-assembled roof structures, for example, roof trusses, and also complete staircases, things like that. Category 4 refers to the printing of parts of buildings through various materials based on digital design and manufacturing techniques. This may be certain elements of a build, it may be rainwater goods or things like that. And category 5 talks about the production of non-load bearing pods. So this is sort of like a mini version of volumetric building. So it could be bathroom pods or kitchen pods, which are inserted into the wider buildings, but they're not load bearing, so it's just slightly different. And then the final category, 6 and 7, refer to site-based process improvements. These can include methods to reduce the extent of labour required on site. It may be using innovative site-based construction techniques that fall outside of the aforementioned categories. This can include the use of brick slip panels and large format wall panels, to even down to the use of drones on building sites. It could be robotic workforces. It could even be down to the collection of data on tablets, which is then fed into a central system, maybe updating the sales team about when plots will be ready, things like that. So there's lots of different tiers and there, just bear with me. So I just thought I'd go into a little bit more detail about the probably the most recognised, the 2D systems. So it's widely recognised and the most established form of MMC in the country. It comprises panelised construction made usually out of timber or steel. This is a well-proven method of MMC and is well established. The structure of the building is assembled, made using the pre-made panels, and the building can be fit out on site with services, insulation, doors and windows and cladding installed, or whilst the main structure of the building is already there. The use of panelised construction reduces the on-site activity when compared to traditional builds, and a house can be completed within weeks from the delivery to site. I do have a short video or a clip of a video just showing an example of how these 2D systems are put together. So we'll just play a clip of that. So hopefully, unfortunately, you can't hear any sound, but this should just give you a bit of a flavour of how the panels are delivered to site, how the buildings are put together. So we'll just wait for that to start. You know, with many forms of MMC, particularly like our volumetric units that we build at Ilke, you've got your initial site works done, you've got your slab down. In this case, obviously they're delivering the pre-made trusses and the panels and popping that together. So the pre-made panels are engineered so that they fit right in place there, and you know the difference I suppose between this and the volumetric units is that you still have exposed elements of the build. You've still got to finish the external cladding, but the speed at which these buildings can go up is incredible. Okay, and then it will show you how it goes on to the next one. So thank you, Charlotte. Okay. So just really to give you a comparison of how 2D compares to the 3D structural systems. Volumetric is far more advanced in that it involves the production of complete stages of the build. In Ilke's case, this means complete finished floors of a dwelling. This includes as I've said before, the plumbing, the wiring, everything is finished. What comes out of the factory are complete units. The production of these is not impacted by environmental conditions. You know, we're in a controlled environment. A constant temperature means that builds can go forward through the whole of the year. We're not impacted on the Great British weather, for example. Modules are produced using precision engineering in controlled settings. The controlled stable environment means that the quality of build and the finish is far more consistent and reduces the activity required on site. Using this method, houses can be completed in a matter of days on site rather than weeks. I do have a short clip that gives you a little bit of an insight into Ilke Homes and our factory, which is located in Knaresborough. What you'll see when the video starts is the extent of that factory. It's absolutely huge. Again, I apologise that you can't hear the music that accompanies the video. So as our units are being built, they pass through different stages of the factory, from the initial build of the steel frame through to it being plastered here and finished, painted and decorated, the external finishes applied, plumbing, the wiring, all done within the factory. So here's an image of one of our units coming out of the factory. They're placed on the lorries. They're essentially shrink wrapped to protect them, and they're taken to their final destination, whereby they are craned into position, each unit stacked on top of the other. And then what happens is we have a finishing, a few days finishing off, just finishing off the joins between the units, stitching them together, essentially plugging them in with the plumbing on site and the electricity. But they are fully occupiable, and as soon as one is first floor has been craned onto the ground floor, you can go inside and walk upstairs. It's quite incredible to watch, actually, these huge buildings being put into place. Oh. Okay, so just a little bit about the drivers and barriers to change. MMC is being recognised as a significant development within the building industry, one of the key drivers being the push for the production of more sustainable and efficient homes, which is essential to respond to the national commitments to achieve carbon reduction and to provide houses quicker to meet the rising demand. So some obvious barriers to rolling out MMC, particularly the 3D systems, is a significant upfront investment. For example, investment required to build factories such as Ilke's, and the cost of producing the units being inherently more expensive than traditional, and the increased cost can be attributed to the cost of materials, the steel frame versus timber framing, brick slips versus traditional masonry, the associated costs of warehousing, the transport costs, and the upfront research and development costs. There are, of course, always some hurdles relating to the perception of modular homes. The comparison we get a lot from local authorities, well, what's the difference between these and the post-war prefabs, for example, and I think the general loss of familiarity with traditional bricks and mortar. But as modular construction becomes more commonplace within the building industry, and as it continues to develop and improve, confidence in the methods will grow, and MMC will become commonplace. So just a little bit about the benefits of the change. The significant benefits associated with volumetric construction, for example, the speed of delivery on developments that we're working on at Ilke. We aim to deliver between 10 and 20 completed dwellings per month, which far exceeds traditional house building delivery rates. We've even achieved 6 complete units in one day, but that was on a day when we were testing the crane capacity, and it was a little stressful. I don't think it's something that we'll take forward as the norm. But our units are 20% more heat efficient as a standard, and units cost as little as £1 a day to heat. We can achieve zero carbon with our units with the addition of PV panels and an air source heat pump. This adds around £10,000 to £15,000 per plot, but that's actually around half as much as it would to achieve through traditional building methods. This method of construction results in reduced carbon footprint, very low waste associated with the production process, and environmental benefits with less lorry movements, reduction of noise and disturbance on sites to the benefit of the local community. And as the modules are produced in a controlled setting, significantly less snags compared to the average new build. So I just want to go on to some examples of some projects that ilke have been working on to date. So this is one of our case studies. In September, we obtained Reserve Matters approval for 57 units in the Forest of Dean. The development comprises 1 to 4 bedroom properties and has been delivered in partnership with a registered provider to deliver the site as 100% affordable. The delivery of this site will take around 12 months to complete. Following the initial site works, which we give around 3 months, the 57 units will be delivered within a 6-month period and will allow a further 3 months for site finishing works. If the site were to be delivered traditionally, with my old PLC hat on, the house building period alone would span a period of around 13 months, meaning an average build period of 19 months. So there we can deliver the project, finish it 6 months quicker than traditional. My second case study is a site that we're dealing with in Homer in Hereford. It's 120 units and we are working in partnership with Stonewater, again to deliver the site as 100% affordable. We're looking to complete this site in around 22 months, averaging at 8 completions a month, and that reduced number of completions is in line with the RP's programme rather than our capacity to build. If you were to build this traditionally, it would likely span a period of around 40 months, so around just short of 3.5 years. We will complete it in 15 months. And I think that's the real beauty of volumetric construction. Work can commence in the factory to build the units prior to and whilst the preliminary site works are taking place. The units can then be delivered to the site and finished within days, and developments can come forward at an accelerated pace and homes available for occupation in quick succession. So that really concludes my presentation today. I'm more than happy to answer any questions at the end with the other panelists. And if I can hand over, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Excellent presentation there and really useful in terms of the sort of introduction to MMC housing. Just before we start, I've got a couple of quick polls as well. So Charlotte, if you wouldn't mind putting the first one of those up. Savills did a research beginning of this year, and they did an estimate about how many, what percentage of the UK housing stock is being built by MMC at the moment. So you've got an option of 3%, 6%, 10%, 15%, or 20%. So how many percentage do you think MMC houses are currently as a percentage of UK housing stock? So a few seconds to do that. And Charlotte, when you've got them in, if you don't mind displaying them, that'd be great. Okay, so we've got pretty even split between sort of 3% and 6%, and then a lot less on the rest. Slight trick question, because Savills weren't quite sure, so they had a range. Their range was between 6 and 10%. So if you click 6 or 10%, you're actually correct in both of those. But it's basically between 6 and 10% of current housing stock. And then if you don't mind putting the next one up, then Charlotte, the next poll. They also estimated how much they think the stock will be by the end of this decade, by 2030, and other people like McKinsey have come up with a similar figure. So again, using those same numbers, by the end of the decade, where do you think we'll be? 3, 6, 10, 15, or 20? I will just do a drum roll for the results, but here they come. So a large percentage of you have gone for either 15% and 20, and it is in fact 20%. So both Savills and McKinsey and others think that by the end of this decade, we will have 20% of our housing stock being delivered through MMC. So that's quite a difference, quite an increase in relation to where we are now. So I'll just do a couple of things. I'll talk a bit about MOBIE and what MOBIE's about very briefly, then housing design in more general, then the planning issues around MMC, a little bit about skills, and then a couple of slides at the end. Always good to have reasons to be cheerful, so I will do those, especially in 2020. So MOBIE, Jadine gave a little introduction. So really we're a housing and education charity focused on improving homes, set up by George Clark, the architect and TV presenter. And really what we wanted to see is a great improvement in the design and the build of homes. And by build, we mean manufacture as much as we mean traditional build. And we want to see that being done through educating young people in a new way of building homes. We can be so much better, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but that's really MOBIE's rationale. And we do that through an education program, working with partner education institutions from BTEC right up to PhD, through school engagement and competitions, and through innovation. So on to the sort of the general context, and Emily really helpfully gave some of this already, but it's in terms of that objective of government by the middle of this decade to build 300,000 houses per annum. What you can see was only about the 1960s did we manage to do that, and when we did that, we had a very significant local housing authority council housing building program, which, as you will see on the graph, has collapsed. That's the colour in green. Volume house builders, if you look at them in terms of the private enterprise, that's that blue line, barring recessions and peaks, booms, they pretty much stayed the same throughout this period. So we don't see a massive increase in our traditional volume house builders, and that's why government, I think, is particularly interested in the MMC market, because it will bring in new entrants like ilke, who haven't built homes before, and that means potentially an expansion in the amount of homes we build. So I think that's one of the reasons government's interested. They're also interested for the climate change and other reasons as well. But clearly, if we're going to hit 300,000, and as Emily I think said, we're about 100,000 to 70,000 short at the best of times. MMC is going to play part of helping us bridge that gap of need. Then, as well as a housing crisis in terms of numbers, I firmly believe there's a housing crisis in terms of design as well. I do like using this slide. Now, I'm not saying that that isn't okay in some places, but everywhere, and to that same standard, is not good enough. So in terms of aesthetics, there's an issue around design, and we could do so much better. But almost, and that's into the sort of the Building Beautiful, Building Better Commission territory, but I'm as interested in terms of actual performance. So I think there's also a design crisis in terms of sustainability, which we know if we're going to be zero carbon by 2050, everything needs to be zero carbon now in terms of new, and we've got quite a job to do on retrofit, and I'll come back to that later. But MMC can do a lot in terms of manufactured housing, has better performance values, and is less compromised by what happens on site, which we see in traditional buildings, that even something which may have quite good values on the drawing book isn't quite so good when it has all the trades working for it on it and compromising it on site. So there's a real opportunity to build better in terms of environment and waste. In particular, manufacturing processes have a lot less waste than the waste on site, and actually the waste on building sites can be quite scandalous. Up to 10% of the waste going off of building sites is actually unused materials, which is cheaper to throw away than have the labour waiting for new materials to be delivered, and that is clearly unsustainable. And then there is the issue around quality for the user. And there's something odd about our volume house building process, that actually the main customer of the volume house builder is the shareholders and is not the actual homeowners. And I think Emily referred to snagging and how much MMC has less snagging. Snagging is if you went to another manufacturing industry, they would regard as scandalous the amount of snagging we have in homes. And there's something we should really do about improving the performance of homes in terms of customers. And also in terms of safety as well. So when the Persimmon hit squad had a look at the performance of its own homes, given some of the public scandal, it found there was a lot of compromised fire safety in some of these sites. Actually, fire safety walls hadn't been fitted or were compromised by what had gone on site. So there's some real issues there. And again, if you're from a manufactured environment, all of that happens in the factory and it's quality controlled before you leave. So there's some real opportunities to improve our housing stock there. So that's the general one. Then obviously, does this mean anything different for planning? And I think I'd start from the point of view, it's housing. It's housing like any other housing. So actually assume that it doesn't, unless, and we'll go through some of the reasons why it might be different. There are things to be taken into account. But in general, it is just another form of housing. It's a slightly different form of housing. It's made in a different way, but it is largely housing. But there is a need to help planners, I think particularly members and the public, understand some aspects of this, and I'll highlight those in a minute. There's something around the sequencing of the processes which is really important. An upfront design in the manufacturing process is a really important thing to bear in mind. There's something around the construction site in terms of the size of those sites and the amount of disturbance that you can create in terms of modular in particular. Timescales, customer choice, which is an interesting one in terms of their opportunity to bespoke some of the design, the digital agenda. There's something quite specific about local labour agreements, which I know don't apply to most housing, but do apply to some large-scale ones. And then I'll come to retrofit. So I've sort of got a couple of slides or a slide for each one of these. So starting off in terms of the general sort of awareness, this is a very popular title for the press. Can modular homes solve the UK housing crisis? Well, the answer is not on their own, but they can do a lot to contribute. And as I said, they can play a big part in bridging the gap. I think they can also play a part in increasing the public's view of the acceptability and quality of some of our homes. So they are not an answer, they're not a single answer to it, but they're definitely part of the answer. We're still going to be building traditionally, but MMC will be, as we saw in that poll, an increasing part of the solution in reaching the 300,000 per annum target. There is an opportunity. Boris talked about build, 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 and he's actually standing in front of a modular house here at Dudley College, which is one of Totally Modulars, and I'll show one of those in a minute. It's build back better as well. That's the other thing. As I've hinted already, there's a real opportunity here to use MMC to build back better, to improve the quality of our housing stock, to improve it in terms of its carbon performance, its user performance, its adaptability in terms of healthy aging, enabling people to live in their homes longer. I think there's more opportunity for MMC to be adaptable internally than there is for traditional build. So there's quite a lot of opportunity here to do things differently. So that's part of thinking how it's different. Oh, jumped on there. So in terms of the process, one of the things, particularly around modular, but are pretty much about all of these, is these are standard components and standard parts, and they are built in a factory, and the design process is up front. So I think one of the things for planners, and particularly probably for members to get their heads around, and this may be a process issue in terms of when you involve members as well, is that when you allow something and grant it planning permission, that's it. Opportunity for changing the design, pretty much zero. Opportunity for fiddling around with internal design and appearance, zero. So in one way, it's a disadvantage that if you want to do some tinkering, you can't, and therefore you need to think about how you engage the public at an early stage in the potentially in the pre-app to get comments then, because what is submitted is going to be very difficult to change. On the other hand, the advantage is you don't get developers suddenly changing their housing design, coming in with amendments, because they can't, because that is what they built. So there is, to a degree, the offside of having to think about the process differently is the opportunity for a developer to say, well, we're going to just change this feature and change that, and maybe do put different cheaper windows in, etc., etc. Does not happen, because this is a standard build built to a standard specification. I think another interesting one for planners, and this is one from Total Modular, is the issue around the build time, which Emily obviously talked about, and the ability to do things with small sites. So this is a Totally Modular award winner, actually recently won an off-site award in the Midlands, and you can see that that is an infill site, and that house came as modules and was erected and ready in 48 hours. So if you think about going to a local community and saying, we're going to build some houses on these on this plot, and it's going to take us, I think Emily said, it can take 12 to 15, 16 months to build, and you're going to have all the builders, trade vans, etc., 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 all of that time, all the disturbance, that makes it a not necessarily desirable thing to happen, although what they're looking out on, as you can see, those sites may not be the most desirable of sites. If you say to the public, actually, we're going to put some houses on here for local need, and most of the operation will be done within a week or so, that becomes an entirely different proposition. And I think there is a potential on small sites for acceptance to be greater. You can also, with cranes, bring stuff into difficult sites, which you might not be able to do very easily with traditional construction. So there's a real opportunity here, I think, to open up some potential sites and to reduce public concern around the disturbance and noise, etc., of building. Then another one, and this is, I think, also quite novel in relation to our volume house builders right now, is the degree that people can specify and bespoke their homes. This is Urban Splash's housing configurator, where people can go in and within their traditional house model, house is one of their modular house designs, can configure the internal and fit to quite a high degree. Now that's obviously of less interest to you as a planner, building regs might be interested, but a less interest to you as a planner. But there is the ability to configure the external as well. So for example, in Basildon, Swan Housing Association have been working with the local authority, and there is a site where they've consented a large number of houses, but the external appearance, there's up to 7 different external claddings that house owners can choose. So you would be granting under that permission for the type of dwelling, but not necessarily the final detail. So again, that's one for, I think, members and maybe us as planners to get our heads around, that will be the form, the content, the scaling, the massing, all of that we might be having a decision over. Actually, we might leave it to the individual house owner to choose what the external appearance looks like in terms of, I think it's 7 approved different types of cladding on those sites, and that is great in terms of home ownership, a bit of a challenge in terms of planners and our control, and perhaps for members as well. So that's one to think about and one to bear in mind. And then I mentioned local labour agreements. Now, obviously, they don't apply in most cases, but the traditional one has been, well, yeah, let's train some people up in construction as part of a large housing scheme, as part of a local labour agreement, and as part of a Section 106 obligation potentially. Now that becomes a bit more of an issue if, like ilke, you're manufacturing those homes up in Yorkshire. Clearly, the opportunity to train the local workforce in building those homes is not going to happen, because those homes won't be built locally. If we think about this as being designed for manufacture and assembly, DFMA as it's known, the opportunities lie in design and in assembly. So actually, there's a need, if you've got local labour agreements, to think about, well, how are you going to train your local workforce into the assembly parts, the working on site aspects of it and the design aspects of it, given they won't actually be doing the construction, because that will happen in the manufacturing plant. Now, it won't apply everywhere, but it is one I think we're just beginning to get our heads around in terms of what that might mean for local neighbourhood agreements. But there's a big skills agenda here, so there's a real opportunity as well to think more creatively. I said retrofit. There is an opportunity for MMC to play a part in retrofit, but it's just a bigger agenda itself, and I didn't want to miss it. Again, related to that skills agenda, we've got up to 29 million homes, existing homes, to be retrofitted, so we can hit our zero carbon target with the built environment contributing 40% of our emissions. It's a real opportunity and a real need, and there are opportunities there to both use MMC and to reskill in relation to the built environment as well. I said I'd touch on skills. So as well as the housing crisis, if that weren't enough, we've got a skills crisis as well, in that in the construction industry, it has, this is Mark Farmer's report, which he did probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, which he didn't hold any punches in terms of what he called it, modernise or die. There's a lot of problems with the construction industry, but one of them is that up to 25% of the workforce are over 50. So that means that 25% of the workforce will be leaving in the next 10 years, when we need to build 300,000 houses per annum, which is more than we've been doing, and nearly 100,000 more than we've been doing in the past, and only 10% of the workforce are below 25. So there's a real issue about how do we bring new people in, but there is a massive opportunity with MMC to bring in new people, to attract people to the digital skills or the manufacturing skills, to retrain people from other sectors, including those affected by COVID. So there is a real opportunity here in terms of the skills agenda to make a difference, and MMC can play its part. So my 2 reasons to be cheerful slides. This one is around the skills. I said we held design challenges. This is the first one that MOBIE held back in 2017 now. What I think is noticeable about the winners of this competition was it was an all-girls school from a very deprived part of Nottingham, highly multi-ethnic, and they see no barrier to getting involved in housing design. And indeed, all of them now want to get into the industry in some way or other. So the pent-up demand and the latent skills are there to be tapped into. It's just as an industry in terms of construction and housing and the built environment, we are really, really poor at converting those people into people coming into industry. Construction sites throw up real barriers in terms of the workforce. They are not diverse, not even in gender. However, I know, and Lisa didn't mention it, but Emily didn't mention it, but ilke have achieved something like 35% female workforce at their Yorkshire factory without even trying. And that's because they've got regular shift patterns, they don't move around. So that environment of creating MMC creates real opportunities to engage a new workforce and maybe part of that solution to where are the people to build these new houses. There's a real risk, I think, for us if government invests in building new houses, we won't build them because we don't have the workforce. And that's one of our reasons to be cheerful. And then in terms of design, my second reason to be cheerful slide is the Goldsmith Street, quite now famous design and development in Norwich. This is a Sterling Prize winner. So Sterling is the sort of the top architectural prize in the UK, awarded by RIBA, normally goes to individual buildings. So this is really significant. I think George Clark described it as a game changer in terms of its council housing, its MMC council housing, it's highly efficient council housing in terms of its energy. There are cars on this site, but it doesn't feel like it's a car-dominated site. There's really good design going in here. We know how to do all of this. We can do all of this. We've just got to get the momentum to do it. And I think in terms of sort of maybe council ability to push design harder, there's a really interesting report came out 2 days ago on evidence. I think it's going to be put up in that panel of resources, but it's called Delivering Design Value. But the two really nice words it said about its assessment of current housing design is it remains stubbornly poor in terms of housing quality, which I loved as an expression. And it also said that it's about time we stop giving house builders a free pass in terms of design. So I think I probably end with their words rather than mine, because I think those are two really important ones. But that's where we are, and I'll leave you with this last slide, which we think it maybe is vital. Innovation and education are vital to the creation of better quality homes. I think probably over to you, Jez.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. And I will move on at pace because I'm conscious of time. So thank you to Emily and Mark. So what is a Bristol Housing Festival? It's a great question. And just to speak a little bit about that, I've lost my buttons, sorry. Bear with me. Where are those buttons gone? All right. No, I've lost the buttons. Charlotte, maybe you can just click on the slides for me. The buttons aren't appearing. So if you could go back to that second slide, that'd be great. So the Bristol Housing Festival was set up really as a response to the challenge that we face in Bristol. So Bristol as a city has 500 people in our emergency accommodation as families. We have, sorry, that's 500 families in emergency accommodation. We have 12,000 people on our waiting list. And into that space, I was particularly struck by the challenge that we face around these issues that have been picked up already today's process around the fact that there is this sustainability crisis, there is a housing crisis, and there's a really sharp end of that. There's a real social cost of that challenge, and the construction skills crisis, and that demands an opportunity to rethink, to create systemic change. And at the same time, we have this emerging industry of modern methods of construction. And I was really struck when I remember going to a couple of housing expos and seeing some of this technology on display. I remember going to Future Build and seeing my first Zedpod. And it struck me that there was a real danger that this technology can end up in an academic silo, or it can end up in a sort of innovation silo. But how do we take that innovation and how do you create the momentum and the political context where these things can be taken and innovated in the real world, and then creating replicable and scalable solutions? And that really was the vision of the Housing Festival. It's not just a weekend. It was an idea of doing a 5-year festival to create systemic change and to really partner with Bristol City Council and to partner with the West of England Combined Authority to do that. So in 2018, we set up on the waterfront in Bristol. We popped up 7 MMC homes, and part of that was about socialising. Part of that was about politics of place. How can you create the ability to gather your politicians and your public at large and the industry and talk about the politics of place, that this is our city and we need to think differently to innovate and come up with solutions. And the idea, though, was not to create another just talk shop. We wanted to create a think and do tank. So 2018, and then the vision there was over 5 years, can we start to deliver schemes in the real world? Can we really show people that the art of the possible is true, but can we do that through the local authority? So that was the beginning of our journey, really. And there are two elements to the programs or the projects that we partner with. One is that they will engage in some way with MMC. It's really important to us about unlocking those barriers to engagement. And the other element is how can we celebrate good news in housing? Strikes me that all too often, I'm afraid, that the sort of general press, we focus on two stories with regards to housing, either an incompetent local authority or incompetent planning decision, or a very evil developer. It sows distrust. It creates the illusion that there's only bad news in housing, and actually there are good things happening, and we need to find a narrative to celebrate those in terms of what's happening. So next slide, please, Charlotte. I'll move on at pace, I think, because I'm keen to get through this. So next one. Yeah. So out of the 2018, there's some images there that show, I think we then started to move into real sites, working with the local authority, and Zedpods, I'm pleased to say, is now built, and the residents are due to move in next week. So again, thinking about the two elements of this, how is MMC part of the solution, and how is this good news for people? How is this building the housing that the city needs? So Zedpods is built upon a city council car park. The car park itself is right next to St George's Park, so it's a lovely location for those residents, overlooking the park itself. But we are not losing any of the car parking space. So that one of the innovations here is, can we really safely deliver this with that interplay between the defendable space and the public space? And this is delivering zero carbon housing above a car park, which I think is around that ability for MMC and housing to think differently about reusing and reclaiming and some of the brownfield spaces that we have in our city. So this was this expression, but the human story is important too. So we partnered with the YMCA and the council worked with them. They had a commercial backpackers hostel that had captured young people at risk of homelessness, and so those people are now, with that existing relationship, are moving in here. And then two of the homes we've allocated, these are all social rents, two of the homes have been allocated to what we're calling community builders. So we're so aware that when we talk about housing, when we're really thinking about the housing crisis, it's also about creating community and places for people where they thrive. So we've really thought carefully about this as a mix of good news story for people as well as the innovation in housing. Next slide, please, Charlotte. That'd be great. Actually, I can see it now. It's popped up. I might be able to do it. So let me see if I can drive it again. So that was the first scheme that got planning about a year ago, and then we've gone on a real journey with the council, and I'll share a little bit more about that. The next scheme that we moved into was Booklook, and so Booklook has now got planning consent, and they're on site. They're just on site now. This is the Swedish. I'm not going to touch the buttons, just FYI. I'm going to let you do that, Charlotte. Booklook is a collaboration between Skanska and IKEA. And we were really keen to engage with them, because I think there's something about their whole model for Booklook is the model started in Sweden around saying, how do we build the houses that people can afford? And they looked at the mortgages that people could afford and their living costs, and they were trying to build to that agenda. And I think that's a very different thinking in terms of the traditional market and sort of capitalist macroeconomics of this. So that has got planning consent. It's 173 homes. It's a very difficult site. It's one that's been in Bristol for a long time. And there was just a real commitment to landing this, and huge credit to Bristol City Council. Did a lot of work of where that interplay between the adaptability of volumetric, learning where the movement can be, but also learning where some of that sort of more rigidness works, so that you're looking at the gains as well as some of the compromises to look at the overall costs and the efficiency of the building. And within this one, a lot of collaboration around what was the energy solution. So not just policy compliant, but actually moving forward, because BCC was so invested in this, to say, how can we take gas out of this? How can we really drive the sustainability of this story forward, which again, very much fitted with Booklook brand. And this is about 50% affordable, so that the Bristol City Council retaining 50% of these homes, it has a housing revenue account. So much of this story is around, this is homes for Bristol, which is also delivering a significant contribution into the homes that we really need in the affordable area. And then another scheme that actually, sorry, I got a frog here, a scheme that got planning consent just last week, Legal and General Modular Homes. And we're delighted by this, because this was a piece of land, you can skip forward, chart, please. This was a piece of land that has been in our local plan in Bristol for 20 years. It's had a few failed planning applications, and it's a tricky piece of land. It's right by the train line there. It's got power cables, but there was a wonderful collaboration between Bristol City Council that were bringing this piece of land forward for planning, working hand in glove with Legal and General Modular. And what we saw there was the ability to work against a set of shared objectives, to work up front on the design and the viability, and to really look at how this could be a great place. And then the consultation with the community and trying to build again that story of trust. This actually delivers a 4.5% net ecological gain as well. And that's become a really important part of the story of how that collaboration using modular, working against those shared vision and that shared values. And of course, although that isn't yet part of planning, that ecological net gain will become part of the planning sort of context, I think, that we're all going to be working in. So that's LNG modular delivering 51% affordable. Now, those three schemes that will move on there have become part of our Innovate UK project. And Innovate UK, we partnered with 9 different modular partners to look at how, under the festival and working with the council, we can really promote and develop this engagement with modern methods of construction and test and learn about how to apply it. And if you can go on to the next slide, Charlotte, what I can show you here is just very quickly what that project is looking at. So there are 3 elements of the project. The first, as you can see on the left there, is that these 9 MMC systems. So 3 I've just referenced. There are 6 more that are being developed through the HRA at the council or other partners. And so those are our test bed. That is how we are working with the council to really, I suppose, amalgamate those 9 to look at our systems and our processes and our thinking and our objectives about where does MMC hit those barriers through the process. The other element, therefore, that sits with that is what we're calling our council change model or our council innovation model. And this is looking really about the decision making, the strategic alignment, the policy alignment. How can we create an environment within a local authority that is sympathetic and empathetic to MMC? How can it be institutionally comfortable? Because I think for many people, when they engage with MMC, they think it's a tweak. It's not a tweak. It actually creates a lot of fundamental shifts in some of that sequencing and thinking. Now, that could be a problem. It can also be a massive opportunity, because where you get the invitation, I suppose, to really rethink things, you can start again thinking strategically, how do we deliver that sustainability? How do we really focus on the lifetime cost of these homes, not just the upfront costs? How do we engage with the social value act? So we're looking at the wisdom of outcome-led procurement about what we're trying to deliver, and not just the upfront capital costs. So whilst it creates its problem for busy people working in local authorities and planning departments, the way we're presenting this is a significant opportunity to think through strategically how, as the MMC sector evolves, it can evolve around an opportunity to build the homes and the places that our cities desperately need. And the next slide, I think, just shows very quickly, I think, where that kind of pain point is. Across the top there, this is the RIBA design stages. And in that traditional D&B contract, you've really got this sort of very beautiful sequencing that people are comfortable with. They know, as Mark was alluding, in stage 4, there's a chance to kind of really drive the technical design. When you're looking at modular and MMC, we see this bunching really in stages 3 and 4 in planning. They come together hard and fast. Now, that is a change in mindset. That's a change in sequencing of decision making. It's a change in governance. It creates a change in the kind of warranty debate and the need to kind of really line up. So many different elements of this, including your procurement strategy. So what we're playing with within this Innovate UK bit is, what are the lessons that we can create? How can we create solutions that we can then share with other councils? And out of that, we're hoping to produce what we're calling an optioneering tool. And that's going to be called Constructing Modern Methods. And the idea there is, what we're seeing, particularly for local authorities, is it's very difficult, and true for RPs, as the MMC market is emerging at pace. How do you interrogate that marketplace? How do you get confidence that your policy and your procurement strategy is going to be right? And we're trying to design something that allows around a set of KPIs that are being co-designed with Bristol City Council for local authorities to interrogate that market, build their business case around what they need on that particular site that aligns with their policy objectives, understanding the site constraints, and then very quickly transition to a procurement strategy. So it's a sort of cradle to grave approach, which I think is particularly on that image, focusing on areas 3 and 4. And we do think that for local authorities, this ability to have confidence about how you can interrogate the market around a set of KPIs that you're looking at for performance and delivery becomes critically important. And then, as I say, driving into procurement, where we can look at how you are looking at the outcome-led procurement, the lifetime costs and performance of those homes, not just the upfront capital costs. And I think just finally, because I'm conscious of time, that this all works out in this broader context. Next slide, please, Charlotte, that'd be great. That there is this systemic need for as again, Mark was particularly into this, some of the housing crisis is fixed by our ability to create more supply. Some of our housing crisis is going to be fixed by our ability in the UK to have a different supply of housing that can work counter-cyclically. So for these factories, one of the operating systems that they have in terms of their ability to deliver is the fact that they need to be building, they need to be churning through these homes as they are delivered. And so how we create the opportunity that those factories can have a sense of demand being put through them could be counter-cyclical. If we had a downturn in the economy, they still need to be building those homes to make their business case work. I think that's a huge opportunity. And then we see national government driving a sort of an agenda where MMC will become hopefully more acceptable and more understood, more institutionally, I suppose, engaged with. So through the Affordable Homes Grant, we see a real commitment for MMC. We see Robert Jenrick consistently talking about the need to diversify and create more competition in our housing supply market in the UK. We see construction costs increasing, which, it may be that some of the difference in costs will start to see greater parity between modern methods and traditional build. And if you've not read Mark Farmer, Mike Jeff's report, Build Homes, Build Jobs, Build Innovation, I'd really encourage you to, because I think that's a critical thinking around this need to look at how, particularly for those asset owners, so local authorities, RPs, build to rent, MMC giving you that quality assurance, giving you that route through where you're going to hold an asset longer term, lifetime cost of that building becomes a real opportunity to drive this change. And of course, within that, what becomes critical is how can we create that demand aggregation. So one of the things we're looking at within Bristol, and one of the things we're starting to talk about within the West of England Combined Authority, is how can we, using the momentum that is there, using the learning that is there, share that, drive that to create this opportunity to aggregate, to drive more supply into our region. So that gives you a very quick snapshot. I think the final thing I'd say is this, is that to agree with Mark, really, when we look at planning, MMC is really going to sit in the existing planning context. I think the opportunity that's presented to us with MMC is that as the industry emerges, is to create these really strong collaborations around shared objectives and shared vision. Around the quality of the housing they want for the UK, and how you're looking at different factors of value. So we're not just looking at upfront price of cost, we're saying what's the energy performance, who's going to own the asset, how is that asset in terms of the energy costs, etc. So that's something which we're working quite hard on, again, using the Social Value Act, and that's incumbent, I think, then on local authorities to be part of that innovation gap, because it's land. So much of the affordable housing crisis, of course, is the land these homes are built on. But we can make sure that we're landing really good quality products that will serve populations for a time to come. So thank you very much. And I think we'll move now into a Q&A session with Jadine.
Thank you, Jez. Wow, 3 brilliant presentations there. And I've had a lot of questions coming through, so I will apologise in advance because I don't think we will get to all the questions during the session, but we will follow up on those for sure. I think we just discussed some really interesting things. There's been some brilliant case studies that you've all talked about, where we've looked at some real planning issues. We've talked about things like delivery rates and how those will be quicker, how it's dealing with affordable housing, how we're looking at sustainability, biodiversity, which is all really positive and really interesting in terms of where we see modular housing coming into the market and coming into the planning system. And I think it's really interesting how we've talked about the creativity that's been involved in MMC as well, in terms of, talking about going above parking and dealing with small sites. So it's hugely interesting and really positive to take away, really. So I'm conscious of time as well, and we have got just over 10 minutes for questions, so I'll dive straight into them if that's okay. So the first one I'd like to start with, which is an interesting one, is are there any areas in the UK where gaining planning permission for building modular homes is more difficult, and if so, why? So I think that's an interesting question. So Emily, could I come to you first with that one?
Yeah, certainly. I think from our own experience, I think if we're looking at sites where an area has a very distinct design ethos, so very traditional, for example, we struggle to get that kind of level of detail. Sometimes we can't use certain materials, for example, tile hanging, and we're getting feedback from the councils whereby they're sort of saying, well, we'd like to see the traditional materials and design details put into those buildings, and we do struggle with that a little bit. So it's one barrier really to the use of the product.
Thanks, Emily. Mark, is there anything from you on that one?
No, I think I go back to my, this is just normal housing really. In some ways, the way it's manufactured is different. Now, the external appearance is going to be the challenge. Actually, we did a young person's roundtable with the housing minister about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and one of the observers observed that they were getting a few saying, "Oh, this development's out of character, that's a reason for refusal." And this was from a young person, probably about 18, and said, "Maybe it's a time for a bit of new character." So I think there's that bit around, actually, should we just be repeating everything, or should we be thinking about something new? Now, there's obviously conservation areas, well, that won't be applicable, but actually, in general, housing typologies, well, maybe it is time for a new typology. So that's one thing I'd throw out there. So maybe even character isn't a reason to refuse, except probably in conservation areas or with next listed buildings.
Thanks, Mark. Jez, is there anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd like to turn the question around a little bit to say where are local authorities learning how to really enable MMC? And I think, again, going back to Mark's point that, it's just housing. But if we are looking at how local authorities using their land particularly are procuring and tendering out their land, are they doing it in a context which is really driving the sort of zero carbon, quality, affordable houses at pace agenda, which it won't always, but may end up being an enabler of MMC. So I think, again, it's how do we move the conversation to the narrative to really driving this quality agenda. And local authorities do have, I think, an opportunity to really influence the quality and affordability of that housing, the zero carbon agenda, in a way that may end up proving to be very supportive and sympathetic to MMC. And I wonder if that's part of the challenge here. It's not just which planning of local authorities are sort of sympathetic to or easier to get planning in, but where are they really driving that agenda and aligning that so it's more empathetic and sympathetic to what MMC can offer is kind of what I think is critical to seeing the change.
Brilliant, thank you, Jez. And I think linked to that, and it probably touched on really a little bit there by Jez, I guess a key question, and we have got a lot of local authorities listening in today, so it's a good question really, is how actually can those local authorities assist in driving modular developments? Is there something particular we'd like to see in their policy or their planning process? And I suppose, again, that's just going back to what you've seen so far in the case studies you've worked through. And Emily, could I come to you again first on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the key things to do is to educate your officers. Go and visit come and visit the factory, come and have a look what the product is, have a look at how it's built, and just really get to know the product and what can come out of MMC. I think there's a lot of barriers in terms of perception, and I think that's commonplace all over the country. And I think, come and visit, have a look at them, come inside the building, see what they are. You'll realise that they're no different to a finished traditionally built house in a lot of cases.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. Mark, is there anything to add from your perspective in terms of local authorities assisting to drive this?
Yeah, I think it's around well, there's a number of things coming together. It's the sort of the focus on quality and to an extent the beauty element of that as well, and the sort of the carbon challenge and sort of the general quality for homeowners and adaptability. Linked to potential design codes, I think it's a real opportunity to, as the report this week said, don't give a free pass on design to house builders. Set the bar high. I believe, and I work for the inspectorate, if the national policy and your policies say that should happen, that's what should happen. And the inspectorate will back it up. Okay, there's an issue around you haven't got numbers, but if you've got the numbers, then set the bar high, and then let's see the MMC people come to the table and say, well, this is what we can offer. And I think that also includes space around the sites as well. But that's as much probably, as Jez said, thinking about your sites inventively and can you help drive that agenda through the use of your sites, which I think Bristol's showing in a really, really good way. So I think set the bar high and don't feel like the inspectorate will undermine you. I think that's always a worry, but I don't think it will if your policies are strong and certainly central government policies pushing in that direction. It's giving you everything you need.
Thanks, Mark. Jez, was there any final thoughts from you? I appreciate it's turning back to the original question from yourself, but
yeah, just to add that I think it's also recognising as local authorities that you do need quite a strong sense of leadership to deliver this, because it doesn't just impact your housing department, it impacts your procurement team, it impacts your legal team, understanding the contracts where, you know, Emily referred to earlier, there's sort of greater upfront capital cost. And if you're going to deliver it as a local authority, that has an impact, obviously, in how those contracts and vesting certificates work. I think it's also recognising that if you are starting on a proposition that says, we are looking here to move to an outcome-led, qualitative sense of what is the right type of housing, that housing may not be the cheapest. So if you're disposing of land, you're immediately up against this issue of, do we want to maximise our capital receipt? And so the work there, strategic, has to be done by local authorities, is creating the policy context where you can create value for money, and the proof of the public value by you probably using things like the Social Value Act, which is what we're doing now. These are really complex issues. So this is the problem. When you look at MMC and you go, yeah, we want that stuff and we want to enable that and want to procure it, you've got to just understand. And again, we're trying to produce a series of lessons learned. There's a document on there around the journey that Bristol City Council is going on. I think the critical thing is, as a local authority, don't go alone. There's a lot of learning out there that you can glean from other local authorities. This can help you get there faster, but it is not just going to impact your housing department. It is going to have a broader reach. So you've got to get those things lined up, or it can be quite a painful, slow process. And I think because of the resourcing issue, local authorities are under pressure. We've got to work smart to make sure that we can maximise the opportunities and get quick delivery.
Thanks, Jez. I think that's really interesting insight from everybody there. So this is a slightly different question, which I want to pose to you, which has come through. So it's slightly longer, so bear with me, just reading through it. So the question is, how are modular homes being made safe from a fire perspective? A speaker at the RTPI's Design Now event earlier this week was completely opposed to any modular homes due to the increased fire risk associated with the timber and other combustible materials in modular construction. So I guess the question is, back to those, how are those being made more safe? Obviously, this is quite topical with where we've been in the last few years around construction. So can I go to Mark first on this one, please?
Yeah, well, I hinted at, I'm sure Emily will comment on the actual sort of the design specification, but what you get from a manufacturing environment is really high quality and a understanding that what you've got from the factory will remain. I think, you know, when Persimmon did their survey of their existing housing stock, it was shocking, the lack of safety that they had. So don't pretend the existing stock is in a good place. It's not. And I think the manufactured environment gives you a much better quality control. And I think, you know, Persimmon had to do it because they had the public backlash, but actually any of the other modern house builders would probably say the same. The lack of control you have over the trades on site compromises some of your fire safety. So what looks great on paper is not great in actuality. And I'm afraid Grenfell's given us some of that as well, unfortunately. There's a very hard lesson. A manufacturing environment, think about your car, comes out highly manufactured, it's gone through all sorts of quality assurance before it comes out, and actually the place where you're going to fail is if you don't assemble it right, hence we need the skills. But actually you've got better ability to understand what its fire values are, and you can trust them more because they haven't been compromised on site.
Thanks, Mark. Jez, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, I think I understand the question, but I wonder if I think the premise is slightly unhelpful, because again, this is housing. So the MMC housing has to comply with the same building standards, the same building controls as any other homes. I totally get that the concern around sort of post-Grenfell Hackett review, absolutely, we all want to get that right. But it would be wrong to suggest that the label MMC in any way creates a fire hazard outside of, you know, I think Mark's nailed the head. What we're driving with MMC is the ability to have a much tighter sense of quality assurance. And a much often a contracted supply chain. So one of the issues is that visibility and ability to understand the different elements of the supply chain. You know, if you've got 5 or 6 levels of subcontractor, that becomes very, very difficult. So the ability to have that quality controlled environment. Now, if building controls and building regs change, obviously the MMC sector will have to change along with all the other house builders. So I think if the agenda here, it seems to me, someone's raising is saying, should we be building with CLT? Well, that is probably beyond the scope of this conversation today, but that's where that conversation needs to take place. We're talking here about ensuring we have a really good quality assurance methodology where those building controls and measures are delivered to a full and high standard.
Thank you, Jez. Emily, can I come to you finally on this one?
Yeah, I think I'd just echo what's just the speakers have said, really. I mean, you know, from looking at our systems, they're approved They've been through rigorous testing. We've got all of the certificates and the accreditations that we require. You know, I'm not sure. Again, is this a perception thing? Is this just something that we need to address? Is this education? Yeah, leave it there really.
I just want to add one other thing as well. If you look north of the border, Scotland is the exception to the rest of the UK. So when we said only 10% is being built using MMC, that's not the case in Scotland. About 70% is, and most of that is timber frame. You know, long tradition of building in timber frame, and I haven't noticed a cry from Scotland in terms of it not being safe or meeting standards. So I think there's a bit of reassurance to go and have a look what's going on there and seeing actually perfectly acceptable, perfectly safe, decent homes.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think in terms of this part of the industry, we are dealing with perception as well, aren't we, and design issues alongside all of the planning issues we face. So another question I'd like to come to, which is one that's sort of cropped up a couple of times in slightly different wording, is around do we think that modular housing is the housing of the future? And if so, how will that affect the labour force in construction? And I think this is an interesting one to come to because, Mark, you touched on this in your presentation. And so it's an interesting one to expand a little bit further in actually how are we doing this on the ground? How do we see this affecting the labour force in construction? And actually, how are we dealing with that in the way we're moving forward with MMC? So, Mark, if I could come to you first on that one, please, that would be great.
Of course, and I hinted, I think we've got a problem stacking up in terms of our delivery of the government target, because I think they'll chuck money at us, and they already are actually, and we'll have an inability to deliver the 300,000 units, less through planning, which normally gets blamed. I don't think planning will be the problem. I think the lack of people to build the houses will be the problem. And that's partly because of the existing demographics and partly because it's deeply unattractive for people to go into, if you look at the current generation. If you talk about manufacturing environments, and then we can talk about that in terms of who they've attracted into their factory, you talk about digital design, if you talk about new skills, it actually is attractive to young people. It's not saying we don't need traditional trades, we're going to be building loads of those. So I think that's that number one challenge is this is a real part, this could be a real opportunity to bring in new people into the industry, which we desperately need. And then I think the other one Jez has hinted around is about that sort of the quality of housing and its lifetime value and the lifetime cost. So this stuff may be more expensive to build up front, but it'd be better quality and better for the people in it and actually perform better in carbon and safety terms. So it's that sort of, and people will want to get involved in industries like that. Actually, when you've got the issues around snagging and everything else, I think some of the people in the industry aren't that proud of what they do actually, and we should be proud of building new homes. So that's the massive opportunity we've got on our doorstep right now.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's a really positive point to be making. Emily, can I come to you on this one? I think this is going to be our last question, just where we are with time. Sorry, Emily, could I come to you on that one?
You know, I think as we build out different developments and people can go and have a look at these buildings, I think confidence will grow. I think it'll become more commonplace. I mean, Ilke Homes ourselves, our development arm of the business actually started about 18 months ago. You know, we're absolutely flying in terms of the sites that we're acquiring and the projects that we're working on. And, you know, I really do think that people will see the value of the quick delivery, they'll see the quality of the homes, and I think confidence will grow. And, you know, I can see MMC just increasing massively. Hopefully people get on board and you know, things like this today, raising awareness of the different types of MMC and the quality of the products that we can produce in this country.
Thank you. And sorry, Jez, just in 5 seconds, an additional point from you before I wrap up.
Yeah, so firstly, these homes are already here. So if you look at Sekisui in Japan or you know, Bukluk in Sweden, we're building these. So these are not futuristic homes. I think what's more important is that we create a culture in the UK where we understand how to deploy these homes. And what I would love to see is the MMC sort of industry emerging in a way that is driving the quality agenda across all of our homes in the UK. So that sustainability and the quality, it creates that competition and a brand awareness. And ultimately consumers, as they get this, I think will be understanding what they can start to demand, and banks and the finance will follow. So yeah, we are on this, I think we are at the beginning of quite significant and positive change for our housing in the UK.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. I think that's a really positive question and note to end on. So thank you to everybody who's been listening to the presentation today. Copies of the videos and the presentations and any further questions we haven't managed to get to, there were a lot, so I apologise, will be emailed to all the participants. Do keep an eye on the RTPI website for more opportunities that are coming forward. We've got another event this week which is looking at planning dementia-friendly communities, and then one next week which is looking at climate change and the local plan on the 16th of December. A huge thank you to our speakers today. I think this is a really topical conversation. It's going to be going on for a lot longer than just this hour that we've had today. And there will be a feedback survey that comes up for all delegates at the end of this presentation now. So please do fill that out. Let us know what you thought of this session, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks all.